We'll kick into it, and Liz, we can come back to you along the way if you have a question. So welcome to the crew and community on the call this evening for the Mountain Bike Online Commissaire session this evening. It's super exciting to have our community together to help have the conversation that we're going to have tonight. So going to start off with the purpose of the session. So tonight the session is designed to empower the community by outlining key aspects of hosting a mountain bike event. We hope that it provides a structured roadmap that covers event details, roles, procedures, along with the importance of team collaboration and communication with a continuous learning focus by reflecting on past events. I'd also like to do a shout out to and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today and extend our respects to all Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders. And I'd also like to recognise the wealth of experience that we have from the people on the call today. With this session, we will be recording that, and you're welcome to contribute along the way. During the first instance, we will have microphones muted, but if you have a question, you're welcome to put your hand up or use the chat function. We estimate that the conversation is going to finish up around 8:15 tonight. So for the first part of this conversation, I would like to introduce Bob Morris and Steve Peterson to join us and to come off mute. They're going to help us talk about hosting a mountain bike event and the structure of that. Bob, would you mind starting maybe as doing a little introduction of yourself and how you've come to be in the event roles and mountain bike space that you currently do?
Yeah, hello. My name's Bob Morris. I started as a volunteer on a mountain bike national championships in '92, and in '94 I was a timing official, and in that time I've had various roles, including a technical delegate for Mountain Bike Australia, and I'm currently the sports operations manager for Rocky Trail Entertainment, and we're the largest gravity enduro, one of the largest private promoters in the country. We do over 40 events a year. We're also the headlining act at Sea Otter Australia. I've also, because of my sins, I've been punished by being also sports director at Crankworx, looking after the World Masters, looking after the XCO specifically, and then during Crankworx, the timed short courses, so the speed and style, now the full tilt and the dual slalom. I've been in the game a long time. I've got a lot of I've seen almost every mistake made. I've made most of them myself, and I'm willing to share all of those mistakes with anybody. And own up to many of them, but likewise, I've also seen really good community teamwork and that sort of stuff. So I'm very happy to share that experience as well. And one of the things I will say is I absolutely love the mountain bike community, and I think it's the strongest part of our sport is the way we all work together, the way we acknowledge each other, and I really appreciate being a part of this community in my small way.
Thanks for sharing, Bob. We'll throw some questions to you shortly, and like to introduce Steve Peterson to the conversation this evening.
Thanks, CC, and thanks for that, Bob. Good intro. So my name's Steve Peterson. I'm the Executive General Manager of Major Events, so for AusCycling. So I work across all the disciplines, actually. I guess I'm a bit of an imposter in the mountain bike space. I suppose I've spent most of my time more in road, but I've worked across all the disciplines, track, BMX racing, as well as mountain biking. I've spent nearly 25 years in the sport of cycling in one form or another. And, to Bob's point, I've made a whole bunch of mistakes over that time, which you learn from. It's absolutely part of the business. When you work in event organisation, probably of the 25 years I've spent in cycling, 15 of them have been working in and around major events. So very much seen a lot over that journey. And I think part of the conversation, I'd love to pick up tonight is, just like the interaction between organiser and commissaires. Be interesting part of the discussion tonight and to get feedback from the group. Spent a lot of time over the years across all the disciplines working with commissaires and many of the people on this call tonight. So so that's I suppose a bit of my background.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Bob and Steve. And I think the community can hear that you're seasoned event organisers, and I think the conversation discussed the nuts and bolts of running a successful mountain bike event is going to be an important part, but also, like you've highlighted, the reflective quality around the practicalities and planning for events that help turn a great idea into a smooth, safe and memorable day is an important part of the conversation. And I think when people are starting to plan for event, infrastructure needs are probably one of the things that people need to think about first up. Bob, what would be some of the ideas, tips, suggestions you'd share to the community when they're thinking of putting on an event? Maybe they've got an idea and need to start pulling the pieces together.
So we live, our life is lived on mountain bike tracks, and the best track in the world could be a great venue for a mountain bike race. It could be a terrible venue for a mountain bike race. It's not the track that necessarily makes the venue. It is the track often that makes the racing, though. So there's a balance. You've got to have that space required for an event hub, space required for your registration, a really good shuttle road if you're running a gravity event. You need parking. You need to have the space for your people to come in. That all then plays into how to find the best tracks. Now, our tracks in Australia, our tracks are usually not owned by the landowner. Like, the landowner is not a mountain biker. The landowner is a national park or a state forest, or occasionally, if you're really lucky, a place like Mount Beauty might have a lease on some property. I think they've got a $1 a year lease on some snowy hydro property. But that's very rare. In most cases, landowners are not your mountain bike direct community. So it's important to get not just their permission, but then all those other pieces of the infrastructure ready to go. Parking, your toilets, your event space, your shuttle road, etc. So yeah, that's where I'd land that one, CC.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to add anything onto that? But I also think it kind of segues into the next part of the conversation around the paperwork, the permits and requirements associated with hosting an event.
Yeah, so I think Bob's nailed the list. I think what I would say, as part of that is, sometimes we see that there's, a really great trail network that might be available to us, but it doesn't necessarily make it, the right event venue. And, that's Bob's right to point that out. And, and I think a lot of the people on the call will know this, but, sometimes, for example, if there's no good having a really good trail network if you haven't got a network of fire trails that that enable some emergency access around that. We have seen events come unstuck over the years where we do end up with riders in isolated locations that are difficult to extract. In the case that you've got an injury. So those are important points to make. And I think, I know we'll sort of talk about this, but the AusCycling website does have some really good event organiser resources. So the organisation guides that are on there, have been developed over the years by people like Bob and others. So there's great resources on there that act as a bit of a checklist when we sort of work through some of that. And to your point, CC, part of that process is seeking permission from the relevant land manager in each case. So obviously, according to different jurisdictions, the permitting process might be slightly different, but generally speaking, you will be asked to, submit an application form, for accessing, the land you wish to use, whether that's an event site, trails, or both. So, and often, following on from an application, if you get in principle approval, you'll have to, then start the process of developing your event management plan, which would include a risk management plan, etc. So, again, a lot of those templates are available on the AusCycling website. So, a great resource in that respect. I think one thing that's really important is always thinking about the community of riders that you're likely to attract to your event, because it should play a role in terms of selecting, the types of trails you might be using. So obviously there is a bit of a difference between, your club event as opposed to, say a national series round for mountain biking. It's really important to think about, what the purpose of your event is. Realistically, the more technical your trails are, then the more exclusive your event's going to become, in terms of participation numbers. So that should play a part in the decision of which venue to use as well. But further to the resources that are available on the website, we have got people and resources within AusCycling to bounce ideas off and sense check as well. I think the really important thing around the pre-planning is, everyone's operating in a resource-constrained environment to some degree, and obviously, the sport is heavily reliant on volunteers, and time is precious, very much so. So, the more work that we can sort of collectively do, ahead of time, not only makes the job of organising the events more realistic, but it also, by the time you get to event time, makes the job of the commissaire who's arriving at your event cold, much easier and, much more appropriate as well. So that's important to cover off as well.
Thanks, Steve. And I think it's important at this time for clubs on the call that may be newer to the event structures. It's my understanding and correct me if I'm not right, there's 4 levels of event. There's a club level event. There's like state level events that concludes a series or championships. There's national champs, and then there's a higher level UCI events. Would that be a fair way to summarise the different levels there, Steve?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely nailed it. That's for sure.
And so with that, there is a split within the AusCycling team on the crew that support that. So for those on the call, if you're looking at club and state level events, your state operations manager is the first point of call, or the best point of call, other than the AusCycling website, which we'll take you to shortly, to check, challenge, discuss ideas to enable your events. Once it starts to get into those higher level events, there's often some pre-planning going on. I'm sure Steve's team, I believe you're thinking 9, 12, 18 months ahead when you're looking and booking national champs. And so those higher events will likely deal with Steve and his team in their major event space. So I might take you over to the website. And can I get a shout out to see if you can see my screen? Is that correct?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me share my screen.
There we go.
Brilliant. Thank you. So here we are on the AusCycling mountain bike event resources page. Where you go to find this is club and the event organizer hub. And through this event organizer hub, we've got a bunch of great bookmark sections with different tips, tricks and knowledge to help support our community. The key ones today that will be helpful is most likely the event organizer's guide. And this has documents around organizing an event. Is a specific one for mountain biking, as well as the other disciplines available on here, including mountain bike freestyle. Another helpful one for the crew to look at is event licenses. For the club and state rounds, you can operate on a day license. And so further information around day licenses for participants and clubs can be found under Join AusCycling, Become a Member, and on that membership page. And then back to the tools and resources as well, is we've got details, general event resources available here, incident reporting. We do hope that you don't have an incident, but if you do, there is a process to manage and support that, and a bunch of other helpful details available as well.
My bike, please.
Brilliant. When running events, there's things such as the event layout, rider registration, scheduling, race day flow, rider communications. What are some tips, tricks and tools, Bob and Steve, you'd have around venue layout and things like that?
Yeah, I'm happy to address the key is play it out in your mind. Basically, when you're turning up, you're parking somewhere. When you're parking, you want to see the entrance to an event centre, or the path you follow, to the breadcrumbs you need to get yourself from one side of a car park through to a registration tent, a coffee van first maybe, then you need to understand where the toilets are, those sorts of signage, that sort of layout of the venue, how to get to the start of the hill, start of the race. Whether you're doing lap races, or you need to get a shuttle to the top, or you need to understand where the liaison starts to get to your thing. All of that signposting needs to be very clear, needs to be very apparent. Usually, it really pays to be consistent. So if you have an orange arrow, for example, guiding people to the bathrooms, guiding people to the registrations, then orange arrows around the rest of your venue will help. If you suddenly change colours, or you're using some other shape arrow, or your trail markings with one sort of signage and the rest of the venues is a different sort of signage, that'll become confusing. I mean, we work in venues that have multiple users. Often we'll have a trail run the week before, and they're notorious for leaving their signage out on course. And what you don't want is your mountain bikers to follow the trail runners' signage. So it's, be very consistent, be very clear, keep your signage in a place where it can be seen from a distance. Use flags, use colour and movement, use bunting, all of those things. And the more consistent you can be, the better the easier it'll be for people to navigate, but also there's those small things which are the look and feel, the just general tidiness of a place. And if you're consistent with all your arrows, all your signage and all your bunting, then that'll make your venue and your event more polished and contribute to the overall experience of your clients, which are the races.
Thanks for sharing, Bob. Lots of great tips and tricks in there. Pete, you've got your hand up. Have you got words of wisdom to share?
Yeah, and on top of Bob's comments there about the flow, think about what people do when they're at an event. Many, many years ago, we were at a World Championships where they had quite a large bar for drinking beer in Germany, but it was on the other side of the track from where the toilets were. So you could imagine what ended up happening. We nearly had to stop the race to get people out of the bar and to the toilet safely. So yeah, things like that, just very simple things that you probably wouldn't even think of till it happens.
And first aid would be another one similarly, in that you want them to be easily accessible, to be found, but also easily accessible that if they need to leave site, they've got the capacity to do so without affecting the race course as well.
That's a really important point, CC. One of the things that's often forgotten is first aiders not only have to get up a track, but they also have to often unload into an ambulance, and finding the right spot for a first aid tent is really important. To have a person present, get them to a first aid tent, and then on-board them to an ambulance. That ambulance needs to be able to get access easy, and not, you want it to not impact the rest of the racing.
Good highlights. I think one of the other things that we need to consider is rider registration. I think the lead up to the event, the rider registration system, therefore does help with the flow of on the day race plate pickup and those kinds of things. Through AusCycling, we do have a couple of suggested platforms, which is Entry Boss and ACE. Both events have pros and cons to the benefits of using them, but with those two systems, they're specifically linked to be able to check with AusCycling memberships. There are other systems available, and if organisers do decide to use those external systems, there is a duty of care then to check people's AusCycling memberships to make sure that they tick the box, because that's one of the requirements and compliance pieces for hosting an event. Pete, Steve, sorry, do you have any tips around event registration systems or things that work from your experience?
Well, I think to your point, obviously if you've got a system that's able to do a bit of membership verification, pre-event, it does speed up that process, makes it a bit more efficient and effective. I'm a big fan of a sort of a self pickup for race packs if you can do it. As many of those memberships that have been verified means that you can pretty much preload those race packs and have them collected as people turn up. It speeds up the process, and it's not a person with a highlighter sat at a desk. But that's that's not always within reach for people. But the more that you can speed up that registration, it certainly helps. I think realistically, you'll still have some people that haven't got a membership that's been verified, or it might just be that you put that race pack on a separate table, so just as they're coming through, it just prompts you to sort of check their license as they come through. But they're probably the types of tips and tricks that I think about. But Bob runs 40 events a year, so he's probably got a few more tips and tricks to share.
A couple others that I would encourage people to build into the registration platform is asking for an emergency contact person in case the rider sustains an injury and unable to provide that information. Also, any injury or more so allergy or injury medical things to be aware of. So diabetes, asthma, epilepsy, and those medical conditions that if they flare up, we'd like to know or would be helpful to know when managing or supporting a participant. So those are a couple of the extra things that I would encourage event organisers to build in and ask as part of that. Is there anything that you want to add into that space, Bob?
Yeah, look, being really organised at Rego is the key. Understanding how your customers are going to come to you, being ready, having the cable ties or the pieces of string, or the whatever your ride packs are, having that all ready as much as possible is the key. If you are running around trying to get that organised when people are turning up, you're slow. And they'll recognise that. It gets back to that, the user feel, the user experience. It might not mean much in the scheme of things. It might not mean they miss their race start or anything, but they turn up, and if you're organised, they know you're professional. It's going to be a professionally run race, and that you've done your due diligence ahead of time, so they can feel more comfortable. If they turn up and you're panicked and running around and trying to find cable ties, they're immediately going to be put on their back foot, and so their experience will be less. Perhaps it will contribute to them not having a great experience.
Good point outs. And so we've kind of got our participants ready to race, and we've set up our event village. And now let's try to have a conversation around the course. When we're bunting the course or setting up our course, it's important to do things like track inspections, track walks, but also creating a course that has challenging features, but also suits the participants that we're aiming it for. Like what drops, jumps, booms do we include? So what's some thoughts around setting up the course and the safety considerations around that's part of the event?
I think, sorry, Pete, Steve, I'll jump in here.
There you go.
Look, the key to it is to hit your target. So your target audience, if they're if it's a world level event, is very different to if you're a club event. So make sure you're hitting your audience with the track that they are expecting and wanting. Outside of that, look, key to it is from a bunting and signage perspective is nobody's going to get lost. So whether you've got arrows guiding people around the course, you want to make sure that they're obvious. You have arrows. You also have then confirmation arrows, so that when they go more than just turn a corner, an arrow to turn a corner, you have an arrow after that says, yep, you've turned the correct corner, you're on the right way. You can use bunting for that. Bunting's got 3 uses. Use 1 is to guide riders around the course. Use 2 is to guide spectators. And so when you use bunting outside of, in most races, or in many races in mountain biking, spectators can't get close to the side of the track, especially if you're in a jungle in Cairns, just because of the bitey things that are in there. You at a club race, you wouldn't need to bunt the side of a jungle track just because there's nobody going to get there. The bunting, you'd need arrows for riders. Your bunting is for spectators. And then the third thing bunting's for is photography. It actually looks good to have a rider going past bunting. It looks like they're in a race. And the bunting, in that case, if you've got logos on the bunting, the logos need to be up the right way. And in much as possible, you need to have your bunting facing in the correct direction and in the photo, which is usually, and I'll give you a tip, usually between 30 and 45 centimetres off the ground. And if you have it higher than that, the photographer will be under it, or the photographer will try and shoot around it. If it's there, you'll almost always have your bunting in the shot. Yeah, they're the key things for things. And then as for safety, look, you really need to be taking care of fall zones where you've got a technical feature and a fast feature. You need to make sure you've got fall zones identified. And then you can use bunting to keep spectators and other people out of fall zones. I think that pretty much wraps that.
I think that's really good. So that's with the hat of a race director on, and now your commissaire has come on site, Bob, and they go for a track walk. How could or do things change once the commissaire comes on site, or is the conversation that we've just had something that happens with the commissaire during the track walk and those site inspections?
Look, I'd recommend race directors have that thought ahead of time, so that they can preempt the conversation with the commissaire. So if you've got a technical feature, and I'll take Jacob's Ladder for example. The technical feature is in Cairns on the cross-country course, world-renowned, loved by riders. The A-line is intimidating. The B-line's a little bit intimidating as well. And up until this year, the B-line could cross onto the A-line in several places. This year, it was through consultation with Peter, Chief Com, it was decided to keep the A and B line completely separate for the entire length of Jacob Ladder, and that made for a much easier bunting job for me. I also approached the trail builders and said, there is a corner halfway down that was, if you fell on the B line, you would fall into the A line. So then I'm then addressed that with the trail builders and the trail the club to slightly bank that corner, so that if somebody does fall on that spot, they're falling away from the A line, so that the B line can't impact the A line. Likewise, the A line would not impact the B line. So the falling from the A line generally is down and safely
off course.
Off the course. Yeah, so we work together on that spot, and that's a really good example of where you're highlighting where the fall zones are. You're preempting. You're having the conversations ahead of time, and then when you get to do a track walk with the commissaires, you can already say, and here's the things I'm doing to address the likely problems. And so you've preempted it. The more you can preempt with a commissaire, the more you can. I like to say that if I've got a board commissaire, I've done my job right, because I've done all the things that they need to be thinking about. So if we can do a track walk and all we're talking about is the weather, that's fantastic, because it means the commissaire is not seeing anything that's outside of the, that is highlighted as dangerous. He is, or she is, if you're explaining the B zones, the crash zones, the fall zones, and the decisions you've made when you've marked the course, and you're explaining them as you go, gives them a level of comfort that you know what you're doing, gives them a feeling that they can they trust the riding and leave you to run the racing, or allow them to run the racing.
It empowers all to support in the ways.
Exactly. Yep.
Brilliant. That's some really important nuggets within that, especially as we highlight mountain bike. They can knock rock and roll, so to speak, and being aware of the riders and the spectators is part of that. And then also as part of that, you're also thinking about where does your medical go, what's the access into and out of those spaces, and then how do you create space for marshals and all of those other parts layering on top of those race considerations once you've got your course sorted. Is there anything you'd like to add around that space there, Steve?
Yeah, but or just probably even just to re-emphasize Bob's point, one of the key documents that we all should be sort of developing, pre-event is a technical guide, or if you're running a sort of a club event, you might just call it an event information or something similar. If you've got the luxury to do it, developing that document in consultation ultimately with your PCP just gets ahead of some of those issues. So you might say you might jump on a call like this and pre-event walk them through the technical guide, which you might have already shared across before that meeting. That gives you the chance to talk through whether you've got a handful of things that you'd like clarified. You might even say that what I'd like you to look at is a couple of these sections on the course. When you arrive, pre-event, we'll make sure that's included as part of the track inspection. So so again, like just trying to bring forward as much of that conversation and consultation ahead of the event is always helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really important. There are some of those supporting documents within that resources page that we showed earlier. So things like risk assessments are really important to create a paper trail around how you're managing and supporting events, emergency plans as well. So having a paper copy that the commissaire or the event organizer can have in their back pocket should things get busy. They've got it takes it out of their brain and gives it a practical place to share and show if needed. And evac plans as well in front of that. Sometimes our medicals aren't familiar with sites. So having a map or Google grid coordinates therefore help make things flow smoother. Hopefully there is an incident, but if and when there is an incident as well around that. Bob, did you put your hand up, or Pete? I think noticed you've got your hand up as well.
I can just before Pete goes, I've got one little thing to mention. Virtual rider briefs are really we started virtual rider briefs where we do a 2 or 3 minute video. Put it on YouTube, broadcast it to all our clients, where you discuss those important points. We have online blogs for our technical guides. An event like the Noosa Enduro a few years ago was the national championships in gravel. That virtual rider brief was important, and it becomes easy. It saves you typing. It saves you, you still got to get your information correct, but it saves a whole lot of work. And people who are time poor will find time to watch a 2-minute video where they might not find time to read a document. Peter Blakey.
Yeah, so Steve touched on the pre-event communication. Nathan, I got appointed in November and touched base with Nathan probably early February, 3 or 4 months out before the event, and started planning everything from wave starts to number plates and so on. And a normal event, I might field 10 or 20 questions and emails backwards and forwards. For some context of the complexity of the World Championships, I did a count on my inbox and outbox for the World Championships and Crankworx, and I had over 260 emails backwards and forwards with Bob and the team, which certainly made the thing run as well as it did. So definitely communication is the key. So, yeah.
I think that's really valuable, and I think Bob and Steve have both highlighted that running an event isn't an isolated thing. It's not a one-person show, and that you do need to collaborate and coordinate with multiple stakeholders, whether it's the club or other external sources that we've already talked about. So thanks for sharing that. And there is tips and tricks, or I think part of on the check sheets in that resources guide helps prompt a few bits and pieces around that space as well. Moving on to our last topic for this section with Bob and Steve, before we move on to our responsibilities and roles, would you mind having a talk with us around timing systems, Bob?
Yeah, wow. It's a make or break at many events. I mean, whilst cross-country events can be judged by the first person across the line as the winner, and usually we can do that with pieces of paper. We've got a lot of timed events in our sport, be them gravity, enduro, downhill, dual slalom, you name it. We've got timed events. Look, it's really important that that we focus even at a club level on getting the best timing we can. Now there are a lot of good systems in the world. I've seen good systems that have been run poorly, that basically meant you didn't get times. I've seen bad systems run really well, which meant you got times, really effectively. So the system's less important to the job of timing. More important is the dedication of the person who's looking after them. I know Shane will remember, and Blakey will remember, years ago we were timing downhill races with synchronized stopwatches, one at the top of the hill, one at the bottom of the hill. That's a system that works. It's not a great system. It's in fact a terrible system, but you can get results out using that system, and often those terrible systems might be your backup. So if you are running a downhill and you've got the world's best, transponder timing with light beam backups and whatever else you've got going on, if you've got a commissaire at the top of the hill with a stopwatch that's synchronized to a commissaire at the bottom of the hill with a stopwatch, they'll save your butt every now and then, and it'll be well worthwhile. So looking for backups, looking at backup systems. The other thing that's key to getting your timing system right is sharing the information as quickly as you can with your riders. I've always advocated for the best way of doing that is to have a display board on the finish line, so that when a rider crosses the line, their number, perhaps their name and their time pops up. That way they see it immediately. That gives them confidence that, it's their time because they were the last person to cross the line. That's really important, and not doing that and leaving it up to online searches, online systems. I think you whilst they work and they are more and more becoming prevalent, that you just go, scan a QR code and check your results after every run. Sure, but having it come up in big bright lights at the finish line is really important, downhill especially. Then, as for cross country, look, information sharing and getting the rider right. If you've got a timing system that's recording transponder reads as they go across the line, and I'll give you a really good example. I worked on the Sydney Olympics, and in 2000 they had the best timing solution money could afford, and the broadcast helicopter would fly over the finish line, and because of the microwave transmitter off the bottom of the helicopter, no chips would be read. Needless to say, the helicopter always followed the leaders. So the only chips we missed, the only reads we missed were the leaders. That becomes embarrassing if you're the timing provider. It's not your fault. You didn't know the helicopter would have a microwave that was tuned exactly to fritz out your transponder reads, but it happens. And if it wasn't for a group of dedicated commissaires, who I'm still friends with, we bonded, road commissaires. If it wasn't for those commissaires, look, those results would have been delayed, and it would have been embarrassing for the Sydney Olympics. That's the sort of example where just keeping a passing order. I know it sounds mundane, and it is sometimes. Keeping a passing order in a cross-country race is vitally important. In the same way as synchronised stopwatches and start and finish commissaires is in the downhill.
Thanks for sharing, Bob. And yeah, I think it's important to highlight there is a number of benefits with digital and technological timing systems, but it's also important to have a plan B up your sleeve to pivot and adapt should something out of your control happen. Shane, I saw you put your hand up. Is there some words of wisdom you'd like to add to this conversation around timing?
Yeah, I agree with Bob. Keeping a backup is very important. I can think of two incidents. One was a World Cup where Tracy Hanna had a run down the hill, and the Swiss timing man asked us, "What are you doing?" We told him we're doing backup timing. He says, "Swiss timing does not fail." But what happened? That run, it failed a race run down the hill. So luckily we have backup timing, and the commissaires were very good, and we got a good result in the end. And the same thing I did a race as a commissaire in Alice Springs, and they had a hill climb, and they had their transponder chips on. Luckily, I pushed my stopwatch at the start because the microwave dish is on the top of the hill from the airport. The timing didn't work, so we just run straight off my stopwatch. So yeah, backup timing is very important for all events.
Better to have and not need than need and not have, I think, is the perfect phrase for this one.
Definitely.
Peter Blakey, I'll throw to you for the last part of this section, and then we'll move on to Shane and Ellie.
Yeah, just as a quick backup timing system, because not always do we use stopwatches as a backup, but definitely for the top 20 men, maybe 10 women, especially like at a World Cup, I always get my person in the start gate to stand behind the riders, that they can see the rider. We know who that rider is by the helmet and their jersey, but also in the background, we can see the start clock. And so as they roll out, we just take a photo, and it's not exact, but at least in Tracy Hanna's case, we were able to guarantee that she left at a certain time. Actually, it wasn't Tracy Hanna's time, it was the French girl who ended up beating Tracy by hundredths of a second because of not because of the error, but the question was asked, did she leave then or 40 seconds earlier? And we could guarantee by the photograph that she left within the 3 seconds of her start time based on our photograph, as well as a manual backup. So yeah, but for quick reference, boom, a photo, it's done.
And it's those moments where you've got to split here or short time to make those decisions, and therefore put other steps in place. So It's really important to have those other options, and thanks for sharing your experience with that, Pete. Awesome. So it's great to hear a bunch of things that need to be thought about beforehand. But as you can hear, it takes a crew to make a mountain bike event tick. And I'd like to introduce to you for this next section some experienced commissaires that we have on the call. Shane Curry and Ellie Smith are going to walk us through the safety, structure and things that help make an event a success. Shane, would you like to introduce yourself first up, and then we'll pass to Ellie before we kick in?
Yep, my name's Shane Curry. I'm a national com, have been for a few years. I've also the president of the Victorian Downhill Series, president of the Fat Tire Flyers, and numerous other things around the state. I've actually raced downhill mountain bikes 37 years. So I started on a fully rigid mountain bike in Wellington in New Zealand. So yeah, come a long way, seen a lot of things happen. As like everyone else, I'm only human and I do make mistakes as well. So we're all in the same boat. You just learn by those mistakes and you move on, don't do them again. That's me.
And I think that's an important quality that I think we can see throughout the session tonight, is learning is a key part and skill of making successful mountain bike events. Ellie, lovely to have you on the call with us this evening. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey everyone, I am Ellie Smith. I've been in the sport ever since my youngest got into BMX. So I started out as a volunteer, got dragged into timing on a very cold Friday nights at BMX, got involved into the committee. Then once he transferred to mountain biking, I went over with him, and that's where my role even expanded even more. Being involved in Boomers Mountain Bike Park on the Gold Coast, helping run that as a bike park, as well as being the secretary of the committee that runs the park, organising events, doing commissaring up until national. And this year was invited to actually do an international event, which was the World's Masters, which was very interesting. And I thank the guys that invited me. Thanks, Peter.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Ellie. And I think it's a great way to highlight the different ways that people do come into the space. Some come as riders, some come as athletes, some come as active participants or dragged in along the children, and then value add into other roles to support events. So the next part of the conversation, I think it's important to highlight the different roles and therefore the responsibilities that make up a team for an event. And there's some critical tasks that ensure that regulations are followed, that safety is done, that things like timing, logistics, and medical are ready in case of emergencies. And so the first role that I would like us to discuss this evening is a race director. What are some of the things that a race director, when I think Bob and Steve have highlighted some of those, but preparation, on the day duties and post event tasks that a race director might need to think about?
So pretty much the same. Race directors, pretty much, I think Bob and Steve covered a lot of it. It's, make sure you've got your tracks ready. You've got all your first aid in place. You've got your venues, your toilets, parking and all that. All your bunting through the track and everything like that. And your volunteers as well, like marshals. I know you have a marshal coordinator, but he can check on that as well, just to make sure that the event is going to tick over. So everything's going to be nice, smooth running event. If you tick all the boxes early, you'll get a good event crawling through and you always get the curveballs. You're never going to stop those, and those curveballs happen at any time. As a race director, be it bunting down or something like that, or someone's crashed, or we've got to change something. It's a role that never stops. As a commissaire, you rely on your race director a lot. for a whole lot of different things in a race event. So yeah, that's my understanding of it, of race director. And like I said, Bob and Steve covered it very well. Yeah.
Ellie, is there anything you'd like to add on that?
No, but Bob has his hand up, so he might want to add. So I'll let him go.
I think before Bob jumps in, I think part of the thing for a race director is prior preparation promotes positive performance. The 7 Ps, as much as work you can do behind the scenes and in the lead up to the event is going to make things on the day more successful because you've got plans A, B, and C ready to roll. Bob, would you like to add?
Yeah. So I just wanted to wrap up what Shane was saying, that he nailed it. You do all the work that's required ahead of time to hand over to the commissaire a racetrack that's fit for racing. And then once racing starts, you take care of the other, which is, emergency response, egress, patient egress from accidents, marshals requiring, whatever they need, bunting that gets taken down. It's the other that you do during racing. And if you've got when you've got a competent commissaire, you can let them run the race, and you don't have to worry about trying to double guess them, etc. If you've done all that prep work, you can just hand over to them, let them run the race while you take care of other.
Thanks for sharing, Bob. And to wrap up this section, I think the other key parts for a race director is conducting debriefs at the end of the day with the key event leads. I think it's important that they review the event performance and the event plans to see if they ran in line with what was proposed and what actually happened on the ground, and then compiling an event report and any other supporting documentation as well that may be required to pass on to AusCycling or other relevant parties.
Yeah. I agree, CC. A lot of that comes down when the commissaire at the end of the day, when you get your panel together, you always get the race director and the other bodies that have been there, your first aid and all that. Always have a debrief, and then you can go through everything that happened through the day, tick the boxes or not tick the boxes, what went well, what didn't go well, and that's, and then you just go through that.
Brilliant. And so some events have a course manager. What is the difference with the role of a course manager? How do they support an event?
Course manager looks after the track. So if being downhill, he might bunt the track from top to bottom, signage, things like that. Make sure the track is in there, same as a cross-country track. He might make sure, same thing, bunting, signage, arrows, directions, and all that. So, yeah.
Ellie?
Yeah, like Shane's pretty much covered it for management. Yeah. So there's, the main really thing is communication between everyone.
Yeah.
Especially when we talk about that debriefing at the end of the day, you debrief on the section that you've been controlling for the day, and we listen, and actively listening to each other makes it so much easier when you've got such a great team together.
That's a really good shout out. The active listening is an important part of being part of a team. I think the other part for course managers is sometimes that they have to look after a team of marshals. We'll talk about marshals in the next part of the conversation today, but that can sometimes fall under a course manager's responsibilities. One of the questions I wanted to ask around the course manager, possibly it falls into the race director role sometimes, is tips for managing course maintenance during an event, especially when an unexpected issue arises. How should a maintenance course maintenance happen if it's needed?
Depends on the severity of it. If it's bunting down in a section, we might ask a marshal to fix that bunting safely to make sure, it could be just a 2 or 3 meter section. So you do it safely, make sure you're not on the track, always look up the hill, always look the direction the bikes are coming, because being cross country, downhill, enduro, they're coming pretty quick, so you can fix that section. A big section, you might grab the course manager, and he might head up there, do the same thing but safely. If it's a bad one, we could bad section, we could have ask the marshals to put out a yellow flag, because we got our red and yellow flags, and they'll put them out and make it a little bit safer for him to do. But anything really serious, we could hold a track up and he can go and fix it.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing. I think there is sometimes those needs to do that. While we hope that the course and the event and the race will run as it should, sometimes there is the need to go and do spot fixes.
Yep.
So the next...
And it could be a dangerous thing too that happens too. Like, I know in Cairns we had a bit of wait a while fall over a track, and we had to sort that out as well. So, you know, in different tracks in the country, different problems arise. So, yeah.
And I think probably layering another layer onto that is weather events. So, you know, if it has been quite windy, removing branches and sticks off the course, where and how to do so safely. And I guess occasionally in wet weather conditions where the water might puddle in an area, creating a way for that to drain off the course if possible as well. Yeah, again, recognising some of these things aren't possible, but where we can manage safety and risk around the track, we try to do so as well.
Yep.
Moving on to a topic you two are very familiar with is commissaires. So I think a couple of parts of this conversation is the different levels of commissaires, and then also preparation on the day duties, post-event tasks. What tips and tricks do you have to share around that space? And maybe Shane, we might let Ellie start this time for this one.
Yeah, she can do it.
Just before I've got to drop off because my other meeting started. Sorry.
Brilliant.
Around this, it really depends. Like, we do struggle to get commissaires into the sport. And I try and encourage all of my volunteers that help at such a local level to go do the online course. But in Cairns, we had a good example where we do need to spend more time with our commissaires to educate them around duties and how to interpretate our regulations. Because it's like any regulations. 3 people can read it and have 3 different interpretations. So we never make a decision on our own. And that's probably a big thing that a lot of commissaires need to learn as they're learning the rules, that don't make a decision on your own. Always bring in your track directors or other commissaires, reach out. As I was learning, I was lucky. I had Peter Bakley as my mentor. I've had Shane, I've had Daryl Crane. I've had some of the best ones here in Australia to teach me. So I've been lucky, but we've just got to make sure people know that people are out there to assist in that space.
Thanks, Ellie. And I'd encourage people to check out the first online mountain bike session that we ran and recorded. There are a whole bunch of tips in that early recording that help enable commissaires to come on the journey. And there's tips and tricks on how to work through the AusCycling pathway to set up and support new people. Thank you for joining us this evening, Ellie. You've been a wealth of knowledge and for sharing some tips and tricks, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. I do have to drop to meetings for my paid work. So see you. Bye.
Thank you. Shane, so Ellie's highlighted that regulations are important. Do you carry a digital resource with you? I know you've been in the sport a while. Do you encourage new commissaires to have a printed copy with them during the event?
Yes, I always have my iPad with me, which has all the rules and regulations on it through AusCycling rules and regulations. If I'm going to something like Crankworx or a World Masters, I also take the UCI ones on my iPad as well. It always handy to go back and just to make sure you're making that right decision. Especially these days, the rules change so much. And there is a difference between UCI rules and AusCycling. We sort of go into line with each other, but there are a couple of little rules in there, especially if you're doing things like World Masters or international races like World Cups, World Masters, Crankworx. But it's always good to have that backup, so you can just talk to the person that's got the issue. Say, look, give me half an hour, I'll get back to you. Flip through your rules, make sure you've got the right decision for them, so for them to hear the right decision, and then move on from that. So as long as you can actually show them the rule, so it's always there and they can read it, and 9 times out of 10 they're happy with that rule. If you just pull it out of your head, which a lot of my stuff comes out of my head, you always got a good hard copy backup. So yeah.
And I think you highlight something that's really important within that for new commissaires, is that you don't necessarily need to have the answer straight away. You can say, hey, can I please take 5 minutes, and then come back to you. That allows you to compose your thoughts, align with the technical regulations, speak with the race director to therefore manage the situation. And sometimes a little bit of space, if a situation is spicy, can help people to breathe and also de-escalate that with following steps as well.
Especially if you're doing like a thing like Crankworx or World Masters or any World Cup race, you've always got a UCI Commissaire there. Lean on them, because they're a world of knowledge. And they teach you a lot. Like I've done World Cups, I've done the World Masters and Crankworx a couple of times, and just a little information you can get off those guys and girls, unbelievable. So it's helped my commissaring leaps and bounds. Yeah.
So that then would come in to help you ensuring that fairness and consistency when enforcing race regulations is applied. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yes.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the integrity or important backbones for a commissaire, is that fairness and consistency piece within that space as well. Other things that need to be aware of for commissaires to be aware on the day is monitoring safety and compliance throughout the race, and then also post-event tasks. So there's things such as race reports as well, documenting incidents and contributing to the feedback, which we've highlighted earlier. What advice would you give to new commissaires, Shane, about preparing for the role and managing on-the-day responsibilities?
Start early. That's the biggest thing. Start early. Get there early. I know Crankworx and things like that. We were there 6:30, 6:45 every morning, and get your team together. Go through everything. Tick the boxes early, because if you've got them done early, you're not rushing around. Because I think as a good commissaire, if you've done your job, early preparation, it'll breeze through. Always have, so myself, there might be a shambles going on out the back, but up the front, it is working like clockwork. Never look like you're worried. Go through the flow, and just make sure that the race looks like it's racing well. And but if you've got that early setup, you'll never have a problem.
Brilliant. I think it comes back to that prior preparation piece. If you've got your plans in place, you know how you can pivot and adapt. Bob, you've got some nuggets of wisdom to share?
Just going to say that Shane and Ali and Peter are some of the best. The key to being a good commissaire is making sure the communication's clear, and that talking to riders and understanding riders is something that Shane's skimmed over and needs to be highlighted. That understanding the riders and understanding where they're at and the pressure they're under and the stress they're on, and being able to manage that and recognizing it, and yeah, that's something that Shane does particularly well. That's why he's one of the best commissaires in the country.
Yeah, I think that's a really good highlight, Bob. And I think commissaires taking the opportunity to do the track walk as well with riders and hearing what they're saying as well can also be interesting. Peter Blakey, before we move on to Marshals, Bob, I might get you to stick around to help support with the Marshals conversation. Peter Blakey, would you have something to add with this?
Yeah, just touching a little bit more on what Bob had said about the commissaire, interacting with the riders. And Mick Hanna has a couple of times complimented me on, caring for the riders as much as I do for the rules and implementing them on behalf of the UCI. And we have to believe or understand who our customers are, who the real VIPs are, and that is the riders. Without them, we're just a bunch of marshals standing around waiting for something to happen. So understanding what they want, how they want the track to run, especially with the elite guys, you need to listen to the elite guys, how they think the track should run rather than what we think. Not so much with some of the elder Masters competitors who want it their way because that's what they've practiced. But also, like, Mick understands that whilst we're friends and I'm, all nice to them, they need to understand, and they do understand, that if I need to, I will penalise them or whatever it has to be, hand down a ruling that they may not like, but they respect the fact that the commissaire is there to do the job. And I think if they respect you as a friend and a person, but also as the person who's running their event for them, you'll have a very good working relationship with your riders over a long period.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I agree, Peter. You've got to have that separation. Like a lot of the riders, I know probably 90% of the downhill riders in the country, and they know that I can talk to them as a friend, but if I've got to make a decision, they know that decision's going to stand. So they listen to me and I listen to them. So it's a big understanding. Yeah.
And it keeps coming back. The common theme is communication, collaboration, and trust within that space.
It also, like you touched on the marshals, it all goes down from a commissaire.
Great segue.
Check in with your marshals. I know myself, I like to do it I probably talk on the radio 90 times more than anybody else, but I like to know that my marshals are up there happy and safe. So, and yeah.
That's a great segue there, Shane. Could you tell us a little bit more about how, and I've been around a number of mountain bike events, and I do really appreciate and respect the way that you communicate with your marshals. Tell us what you do that makes it work so well for you and how it contributes to a successful event.
Marshals are the backbone to a downhill race, really. But if we don't have marshals on the track, we don't have a race, because we're not safe for a start. And they're our eyes and ears on the track. So, and they can be thrown into some of the worst situations on a track, especially in downhill, where they've had a crash and it can be pretty ugly. But they're our eyes and ears on the track. So we have to treat these people with utmost respect. Myself, like I said, I radioed down the hill, asked them if they're all happy, okay, do they need anything on the track, and I do that quite a lot during the day. Some people say I actually take 2 batteries to races because I use my radio more than anyone else, and also at the end of the day, I always thank everybody that there, from marshals to first aid to my colleagues. So, be respectful for everyone, communicate with everyone. If you've got good communication with your downhill marshals or cross-country marshals or enduro, you'll have a good event, because you know exactly what these people are doing and they know that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Bob, I've got a question for you around marshals. Marshals come with a variety of different qualities. And we know with our events, we have, let's say, green zones, which are, let's say, low risk, to yellow zones, which are moderate risk, to features that are high risk. When you get your marshals or you're collaborating and collecting them, how do you choose who goes where on the track?
Yeah, it's an interesting art. Look, you've got to trust. You've got to have a level of trust in the people who are in those key positions. If you've got a rock garden, you want to marshal that. You want to have somebody there, especially if that rock garden is remote from the first aid. You want to have somebody there that you can trust, who knows. And look, it comes down to communication. If you talk to the people, talk to your marshals. In Cairns, I didn't know many of the locals who were putting their hands up to marshals. So I get to know them over the time, and you learn that there are some people who have been at every world level event in Cairns, and they know how they've been on Jacob's ladder every time. And Jimmy Chan, if you put him anywhere else, you're wasting a resource, because he absolutely knows how that section works.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, if you're going for, you'll have doctors and lawyers, and you maybe don't want to put a lawyer in the rock garden, but you might want to put a doctor there. And having just talking to the people, understanding what their capacity is, knowing what they are like and what they ride normally, understanding if you've got cross country riders who don't ride downhill, you don't want to, and you've got downhillers and you're trying to marshal a downhill track, maybe you put the downhillers in the more technical places and you put the cross country guys in the spaces where, it's maybe less technical and they're doing more of a crowd control area. That's just communication, understanding the people you're working with and recognizing their skills.
Yeah, look, I think those great points. And I think there's systems around such as Volunteer Local, which helps event organisers herd and allocate their marshals to certain times of the day. And kind of like we highlighted with rider registration, where you should ask things like emergency contact, injuries and allergies. With these Volunteer Local, these registration platforms, if you have the capacity to ask, do you have a first aid accreditation? And do you have any past event experience? That can help help you think about where you may allocate some of those people ahead of time, because you've got those nuggets or information and tips and tricks around that. Bob and Shane, have either of you gotten a story or an example of a situation where a marshal's quick actions help prevent or manage an incident at a race? Is there a story that pops to mind? There's probably plenty of stories.
Where do I start? Or where do I finish?
It's every race. It happens all the time. The marshals are an amazing group of, that, and Shane said it, and the volunteers are what make mountain biking events work. It's what makes our sport so good, is that community we've got involved. Unlimited number of times. I had one last weekend in Ipswich where I had a marshal who's a doctor, and she was on a bike. Her daughter was riding. She's a rider, and I said to her, "You carry the high vis, carry the marshal plate, and roll around with our crew. I run a Superflow, which is a fun duro. Roll around with the riders and be a part of it." Anyway, she was rolling on a different course when an injury happened, and she was the second person there because she heard the call from over the radio, and she on her own just said, "I can be assistance there." By the time I got there, which wasn't that long later, she'd already done the assessment. She'd already triaged the patient. She could hand over to the medics the information that was vital to those medics being able to extract that person, and that's just finding those nuggets of humans. We have doctors, we have medics, we have paramedics. They're constantly in amongst our community, and finding them and putting them in place to, that's my key.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing. Pete, you put your hand up. Oh, sorry, Shane.
All right. So I know in the VDHS we have a guy in our one who's a paramedic, and I actually have him on our committee, and he comes to every race, and we put him in the most dangerous places we can put him, and because I know that section is going to be looked after. So yeah, if you've got those special people, give them a role. We chuck this one on our committee, and he comes every race. So,
I call that value adding, Shane. Well identified and value adding.
Yep. It just makes my life a whole lot easier as a commissaire as well, because I know that section's in good hands. Yep.
Thanks for sharing, fellas. Peter.
Just as well, I suppose, never take a marshal's ability for granted. Over the course of the 2 weeks of Worlds and Crankworx, we had a few days where pretty much all of our marshals were high school students. They were supported by teachers. Some of them weren't particularly interested in marshalling. They were more interested in watching the big jumps whilst I was trying to give them a briefing. But all in all, some of those kids were amazing. And one short snippet that come to mind was one of the boys was at an accident, write it down. You know, he called up, gave me his marshal point number, write it down. And I said, is the rider badly hurt? And he's like, wait one moment. And he comes back to the radio and says, rider pain threshold 7 out of 10. I'm like, what the hell? Like, so this was a high school student. So the rider was obviously in a fair bit of pain. But yeah, so you just never know what you're going to get. Some are good, some are bad, but generally they're good. They're there at least because they're passionate about the sport. And they'll do their utmost to make it a success with you. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing another great story, and great to hear how that school, hopefully, or the parents or that community of those junior riders were facilitating conversations to check those pain levels and things like that. I think that's a really interesting question that he asked. We're going to move on to the next category, which is timing officials, and recognise Bob highlighted a few things around timing officials earlier. I think, Bob, maybe you could just do a quick run through around what things does a timing official need to do in preparation for the event? What are the things that they need to do on the day, and then some post-event tasks to support that space?
Yeah, look, the pre is having a system, knowing your system, having a system that works. Having the backup processes as well as backup systems in place. That's the pre-event. On the day, it's making sure your registration data is uploaded. If your electronic system is pinning to registration data, which mostly it should. Making sure that that's all that the registration data is clean, that it's and then it's supporting the commissaires by getting start lists ready where that's necessary. Often your commissaire secretary or that role, whether it's an individual or a has been is a commissaire or has been handed back to the event to do. That role of secretary, where the start lists are collated and corrected and distributed. That's a very important part that often the timing official will end up doing. And then once racing starts, what's important for the timing person is to not be distracted, and which means that you as an event organizer or as a commissaire need to take the pressure off the timers by not having riders coming to them asking, about their time. If you can trust, as a commissaire, if you're trusting your timing official, you need to be a buffer between them and the riders. So as far as post-event goes, pack up and get out as fast as possible. No, that's
finalising results are part of that there.
wrapping up and making sure that the events are all online, the results are all online, making sure that everybody's got their results. I know that there's been occasions where it takes days to get through results. I feel physically ill when I hear a story of a mountain bike event where the results have taken more than half an hour to get out. That it pains me, and I hate to hear it. Regardless of who the timing official is, they're going through hell, and I feel their pain physically. So the commissaire's role is just to make sure that the timers can actually get their job done, and not be disturbed constantly by the parent who thinks that their son was faster or daughter was faster. It's important to keep those people out of the timing tent and let the process happen. If you're a commissaire and you're not, if you for whatever reason you don't trust commissaires, then having those backups in place and having that, being able to support the timer by having that backup system is really important. And if you can provide them with whatever information you can to help them get their job done, that's good.
Anything you'd like to add on that one, Shane, or would you like to tell us about being a shuttle uplift coordinator and what's required for that for downhill events?
I think as Bob says, it's nothing worse than waiting half an hour for times or even longer. But I feel for him too. It's not a good place to be in. I've worked in timing as well, so it's not a good hole to fall in because there's no coming out of it real fast. But no, Bob's been around it a long time, so yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's one of the things for timing. They are in a critical position. Results, races rely on results,
Right.
and creating that space and supporting that is really important, and hoping that the systems play the part as they should, but you never know.
That's right. Yeah.
The last key part for this section is, and specifically for downhill, is shuttle uplift. We recognise that shuttles are an important part of downhill, but there is some rules, requirements and tips and tricks that can help with that section of the event to run smoothly. What's some things that you need to think about in preparing shuttles for an event, Shane?
I know all the tracks I've been to in the country was probably 90% of them, downhill tracks anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Your shuttle road is your key to getting riders to the top of the hill quickly, safely, and all that. So that has to be checked. And every shuttle road is different, whether you're using buses, four-wheel drives, or anything like that. So that needs to be checked as a commissaire. I know we had a look at Govno Cairns for a few years, and that's always a hard one depending on weather. And it's like any shuttle road that's off road, it always depends on weather. So you've got to be looking at that. Turning areas for your shuttles, because they are towing trailers. Make sure you've got sufficient room to turn a trailer safely and to load. An area for riders to actually stand out of the way safely. So have everything bunted off and all that. And 9 times out of 10, you've got a shuttle director who's there, who'll run the shuttle for you. And if you like at a big event, we'll always allocate a commissaire to do that, to make sure that everything's running smoothly, riders are behaving themselves, they've all got their safety gear on. So, especially under 17s and down, have to wear the proper safety gear. So they can be checked at a shuttle line for uplift. Ticking off riders for racing, like that's done at the bottom of the hill. So at the top of the hill, we know that all riders are present at the top of the hill to make it nice and smooth for starting. Because if you're waiting around, and I know we had a couple at Crankworx that might have turned up late. One turned up late. He went missing somewhere. We don't know where, but he turned up. But ticking them off at the bottom and things like that. So making a safe, usable area in your shuttle.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to highlight that there is a requirement in the tech regulations around the amount of people to get up a shuttle uplift as well. So are you familiar with that, Shane? Or
it's about 150 an hour, I think. It's
120 an hour.
I go on. We try 150. So getting more
people up the hills means more satisfied riders. How do you manage that, or how do you calculate that? And I know that's probably a bit of an art to that.
It's a big art because all shuttle roads are different. You just load your trailers, times it by how many people you get up there, how many shuttles each pod runs, how many bikes and humans you can get to the top of the hill, and just calculate it into that hour. Yep.
Peter Blakey, would you like to add something? Sorry, Shane.
Sometimes it works.
Yeah, the minimum number of 120 is based on a 30-second gap between riders at the top, going off the start line at 30-second intervals, and based on a few gaps even in between them is, and timing to get from the shuttle to the thing is where Shane's saying 150 is even better, because sometimes they take a little while to get from the shuttle to the start line. But yeah, you want to have a minimum of 120. We were a little bit lower than that. I think we're about 18 riders per hour lower than that at Crankworx and Worlds, but we dealt with it. But yeah, that's where the number comes from.
Thanks for sharing that extra detail, and the method to the madness for how that number came about.
Yeah, it works, but not all the time.
Yes, and that's, I think it's important that shuttle uplift coordinators are aware of the event schedule to help juggle in with that, especially when there's Group A and Group B seating, and how you prioritise riders onto shuttles for those different event schedule requirements.
Yep.
And then also being aware, like you've highlighted, to address logistical requirements. Sometimes a tyre goes on a vehicle, or if it's wet, things get stuck. So being aware and being able to pivot and adapt, I think, is important as well.
And especially what event you're at, because if like a club event or a series event, it's not too bad. You go to something like an international event, like a World Cup, you've got to deal with coaches, trainers, wind trainers, and things like that. So there's a that's the curveball that comes at you at bigger events. So you've sort of got to allow for all that as well. So as an uplift director and com, it sometimes can be quite a hard little job.
And I think the other part as well, and maybe Shane, you might be able to help understand this, is that some event organisers, when they open up events where they have shuttles, they put a maximum number of registrations that they can take for the event based on shuttles and herding of cats. Is that fair to say? And then they have a bit of space as well to move that slightly. Is that fair?
But that is fair. Yeah. I know we do. We look at what the track can run, what the uplift can do, depending on, down here in Victoria, we've got Narberthong where, we're looking at a half an hour uplift. So, you've got to take all that into account, and, it's a tight area for everything. So you've got to take all that into numbers, and I'm lucky in our club, we've got a guy that's a great uplift guy. So, he's a good numbers person, so that's his job. So if you've got a good numbers person and someone that can talk, communication again, someone that can talk to riders, get them on, no yelling, no screaming at them. This is what I want you to do. This is where I want you to go, and that's a big key. That communication again. If you haven't got communication, you break down.
Perfect. And the last thing I'd probably add to this section before we move on is just being aware of who your drivers are and the requirements around insurance and compliance. So checking driver's license, making sure people are comfortable in an off-road environment, being aware that your drivers are comfortable moving trailers, and then also being aware of that there can be some manual handling involved with this role as well, and how people do so safely. Shane, you've been a wealth of knowledge this evening. I really do appreciate you sharing your tips, tricks and tools, and we may throw back to you as we move on to another part, but thank you, Shane.
Sure. Yep, thank you.
Awesome. I do highlight that we have gone over time this evening, and I hope that you can stay with us for a little bit longer. We are on our last section this evening, which is that being aware that great events don't just happen, and that smooth execution helps shape that, and split-second decisions, working under pressure and lessons that follow are an important part of this. So for the last section of the evening, we will be joined by Peter Blakey, who's a UCI level commissaire, who will share some insights around what worked, the challenges the team faced and decisions that shaped the event. We also may have Nathan Bassett, the Crankworx and UCI Masters, join us and provide his thoughts around parts of the event as well as the event director. Peter, do you want to you've given us a little bit of information with the nuggets of wisdom you've provided in the lead up. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about how you became a UCI level commissaire before you kick into your section of the evening?
Yeah, well, I was the co-founder of the Cairns Mountain Bike Club way back in the 80s with Glenn Jacobs. I got into running the events, building courses, and for our first ever World Cup in 1994, we built a course, and these bloody commissaires turned up from somewhere else in the world who didn't speak very good English, and we had a 2-page list of things we had to fix by the next morning before practice. So we got them all done, and I said to the race manager at the time, like, who are these dudes? And he said, well, they're the commissaires. So I said, well, can we do the course so that we know what they want when they get here, and we'll do it before they get here, not the night before we start practicing. So we arranged a national level course. Back in the day, it was literally 1 day of training and rule book stuff, and then we had a written exam, and then we had a 20-odd minute one-on-one with the facilitator with a scenario-based verbal exam, which held about 60 or 70% of the weighting of your mark was based on that 20-minute exam, the oral exam. And so, yeah, I passed, and I was told later that I was equal highest scorer ever that he had put through the course, and suggested I give up building courses and become a commissaire. and that was 31 years ago. So yeah, and then in 1999, the same person, Martin Whiteley, saw me at the lead up to the Sydney Olympics and said that there was a course on in Malaysia and that he would put my name forwards through Cycling Australia. And I went and did that. And yeah, in 1998, I was UCI International Commissaire. And I have got no idea how many events I've done, anywhere between 4 to 9 international events a year. I probably run it over 28 years. 27 years. So yeah, I've
busy.
Seen a lot. Yeah, lots and lots of world championships, World Cups, Crankworx's, Masters events, them all. Yeah, so it's been an amazing journey, which I still have a few years left in me. But something for any commissaires listening in, do it for the right reason. It's not easy, and not everyone can be a commissaire or a good commissaire. But honestly, it's taken me around the world many times. I've met so many great people. All the people here that I'm looking at in the screen are amongst those great people that I've become very, very good friends with. And when Bob said he was at that race in 1994 at Thredbo, I think I was there, and I think we drank a few rums together way back then. So yeah, so
Thanks
that's
for
me.
sharing.
Yep.
And it's interesting to hear how active a UCI commissaire can be. They are limited numbers within Australia to support events. What does it look like when you go and do an international? Do you do international events, or are you mainly supporting events within Australia in that UCI level, Pete?
No, I rarely do Australia. I don't put my hand up often for Australian events, like at a national level, because I think there's enough competent commissaires in Australia. And I did a little bit of mentoring with Andy previously, which was really good. And that's how Ali came on board, and a couple of others. But yeah, like I said, well, last year I did 9 events around the world. Actually 8. One of them got cancelled, but it was like India, Andorra, New Zealand. You know, I've been to South Africa and China, you know, so many places. So yeah, I haven't done, well, actually any national level stuff for 10 or 12 years. There's definitely enough good people here to do those. So
for those on the call, in Australia, we nominate and put our hand up for national opportunities. And is that similar for the UCI opportunities, that they provide you with a calendar and that you nominate, or do they more so knock on people's doors to come and support specific events?
Yeah, it's totally opposite to how it's done in Australia. We get our appointments generally October, November, the year before the season. And that appointment is directed to me, or, you know, and then if I choose to accept it, like, what's his name? Then it goes from there. The idea behind that is complete impartiality. If I was to put my hand up for a job, I would never get it. And the same if a race director asked the UCI to have me appointed, then they won't get me. So because the UCI would believe that there's something going on, you know, there's some favoritism. When we go to events, literally as much as we would like to spend another week in Andorra, they frown upon us taking any extra time after the event because they think that, you know, the race organizer might feel obliged to give us an extra week in a hotel for free or whatever it might be. And then, because I'm not always just judging riders, I'm also having to deal with and judge, you know, the event organizers and deal with them. So yeah, it's all about being completely impartial. We're not allowed to take partners to events because, again, you know, the organizer might feel that they should give your partner breakfast or whatever along with me, and then again we lose our impartiality. So
thanks for sharing, Pete. And I think it's probably interesting for a bunch on the call to have a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, on something that they may be aiming for in the future. So, reflecting back on the Masters and the Crankworx events, what would you say was one of the most most things that made the event successful for you and your crew?
Well, 3 or 4 of them have been on this call, definitely. You know, I've worked so many times with Bobby that we are very, very good mates and we understand how each other work. And I really don't think I was in Bob's face at all over the Masters about the cross country. He's so good at his job. We talked about that change on Jacob's Ladder and I knew it was done. I rode the cross myself the day before and checked out most of it, but yeah, it went well. And I can honestly say, hand on heart, that my panel of commissaires within Australia were the best panel I've ever worked with, possibly even in the world, because you tend to get good commissaires around the world, but sometimes they're put on the job and, you know, they don't speak very good English, and some of them are put there because they were close by or whatever. But the crew that we had for this year's event were probably the best, well, the best I think I've ever worked with. So thank you to those guys for sure.
Nice shout out there.
Some of the successes, I think, were some of the changes that, you know, when Nathan and I started talking early in the piece, that were issues or lessons that we learned from last year's event. We have generally in the Masters, unlike Elite, we only have one category on course at a time, whereas we had up to four different age groups in a wave start, and then we would have 3 to 4 different wave starts or different races just for the men. And last year it was an absolute cluster, let's say fiasco, but you know what I mean. Trying to pull riders who were lapped and to identify which riders were on which lap. They all had black numbered number plates, and we had different ranges, like 01 to 99 was such and such an age group, and 100 to 199 was another age group, but you're looking for numbers coming towards you at 40 k's an hour. And so when we started talking about how we could fix this, the first thing was we said, okay, well, we're not going to pull riders who have been lapped until the leader finishes the race, and then we'll pull every rider after that. That was one big thing that made a difference. You wouldn't do it in a World Cup or anything like that. You actually pull riders who are 80% from being lapped, or sorry, 20% from being lapped. If they're 80% behind the leader, they get pulled then.
And a number of our commissaires would probably have heard about the 80% rule as part of the training.
Yeah, I haven't done any of your regional courses, but yeah, I mean, it's something that I wouldn't even implement in an Australian level race unless it was national champs. But even then, I don't think we did the last time I went to national champs. But yeah, so we decided it was Masters, and we'd give them the opportunity to ride as many laps as they could. Some of them had come from around the world, and you didn't want to pull them out of the event after 1 or 2 laps. So we let them ride the entire race. The second thing that Darryl and I talked with Nathan and Sasha about was changing the color of the number plates, and so that we had if we had the maximum was going to be 4 wave starts within each race, then we had 4 different colors. And those waves went 3 minutes apart. So we did have in times where the leaders went off on the first wave. Towards the end of the race, they had passed some of the other age categories. So the numbers and the colors were starting to mix up. But looking for a color and the leader of that color was much easier than looking for a number range. And then once the leader had crossed, then it was easier to just pull every rider with that same color out after that. So yeah, that was a huge learning from 2024 and something that we implemented and worked really well.
I think that's a great way to highlight that, taking learnings from past events, so the 2024 event specifically, and applying those learnings into 2025. And Nathan, I think it would be fair to say that implementing coloured race plates wouldn't have been much harder on what you were doing with waste plates already. Is that fair to say, and just keeps things a bit cleaner?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great recommendation from Peter when we first got together around this year's event. Obviously, really fortunate, I suppose, in having had a second year runway where it's not often that you get to deliver something like a world championship back to back 2 years on the trot. And to bring, I think the talk about all the discussion around the team is so important, and we're really fortunate to have a great group of people that have been around both Crankworx, but then coming together for the Masters 2 years in a row again, that it gave Peter and the team and Bob and Justin's input from a race director perspective, Sasha from the athlete services point of view, really capture the feedback of what was good and what was bad in the first year we delivered it, and how do we get those incremental improvements, those 1%ers that we can add up each year. 10 1%ers makes a 10% better customer experience. And so I think there's some really great feedback from the team year on year, that really simple changes that don't cost anything other than a bit of a conversation, that makes the experience for the riders better and makes the job of the commissaires significantly easier as well.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing. Gentlemen, was there any feedback from riders or spectators that stood out particularly as positive and encouraging over the event that you received?
Sorry, who were you asking? Me?
Oh, either of you. Was there any feedback that you heard from riders or spectators that was positive about the event that you'd like to share or pass along?
Well, we don't really do that much of a briefing with the riders, and sometimes you do get to hear from them. I actually remember one of the corners that we changed down the lower part of the downhill during Crankworx, and it was a very simple corner previous, and riders were just taking it for granted, and we taped out the outside of the corner to make them ride up over some roots, and it caused absolute havoc with even the under 19s and the elite riders. And I remember Mick Hanna pulling up, well, Tracy first off told us that some riders had been up there pulling the posts out to make it easier. So we went up and monitored it for quite a while and put all the pegs back in and kept taping it and taping it and taping it. And then Mick Hanna pulled up on one of the runs and he said, "That corner, that's amazing." He said, "You've now made that into a feature, not just a very benign corner." And so little things like that, like, Nathan said, it's those tiny little things that literally made the tape a little bit different. And in the same context, I suppose, during the World Championships, we changed the taping up in the rock garden. And when we talked about the experience and setting a course based on your clientele, it's very difficult when you're running a Masters World Championships, because even within an age category, there's a huge disparity of riders' abilities. But over the entire field, it's unbelievable. Like, you're not setting a course for 150 elite men. You're setting a course from somebody who's 70-year-old lady to a 35-year-old guy who literally should be elite. So that's very difficult. And we had our challenges up in the rock garden during the World Championships to try and get that right. And part of what I sort of say about my commissaires is, be understanding and be prepared to make changes based on what feedback you get. But at the end of the day, you do need to make a decision for, the bulk of the people. And I had a saying that I started to roll out, and it is this, that you will never make all of the riders happy all of the time. The smart thing to try and do is to keep most of the riders happy most of the time. And obviously in doing that, you're going to have some of the people unhappy some of the time. But anything other than that, all you're going to do is upset everybody. If you're trying to make everybody happy, it's not going to work. And all you're going to do is have everybody unhappy with you. And so, yeah, just go with number one. You'll never keep all of them happy all of the time. So, yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you. Bob, you put your hand up.
Yeah, look, I got to speak to a lot of the cross-country riders, and one of the things that has been the feedback for both years we've run Masters is they really acknowledge and like that we treated them as racers. A lot of Masters courses treat them as old people. We put on racetracks. The cross country loop was a world class loop, and that would have sat almost equally well at a World Cup level, and the Masters riders really appreciated that. Likewise, the downhill. We put on a world class downhill track. We didn't put on a Masters track. And they acknowledged that, and they really respected that we'd put that for them. And that comes back to that one of the first comments we did, is designing courses for your customer, designing events for the people you want to turn up to them. We've been doing that certainly at the Crankworx and World Masters level.
I'd like to add another one in there for you, Bob, around the full tilt. So the full tilt was a whole new discipline sport event. What was the feedback that you were hearing in the lead up to the full tilt, if there was, and then I guess post event being something that was so unique?
Look, I've got to say that when I first started having a conversation with Nathan, we always said it was the course that would make the event. If you didn't have the course that was raceable, even if it was great riding, you wouldn't have the event just wouldn't work. And what was delivered by the trail builders, amazing bunch of guys, and Glenn Jacobs's vision in the front of that, but everybody's implementation was a course that was both really, really good to ride, and then also turned out to be a really good race course. As for the riders, they were saying it's the best day on a bike they've had for years. These are professionals who are on their bike every day, and have been for some of them, a couple of decades. They were all talking about it being the best day they've had on a bike forever, and that makes it pretty easy to deliver an event. When you've got happy riders, you've got happy, you've got good racing, and it wasn't without challenges, but it was certainly a very fulfilling event.
Thanks for sharing, Nathan. You've got some comments, and I'd also be curious, as an event organizer advocating for something unique like this, if you've got some words of wisdom to share.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's an interesting little case study without going too far down the rabbit hole, but full kudos to Bob alongside the trail builders in terms of both creating something that was truly unique and made it quite special. But Bob kept saying to me, he goes, it doesn't matter how cool the course is, it's how it races. And I think the work behind the scenes, everything we've just spent the last 2 hours going through kind of got turned on its head for full tilt. All of a sudden we went from timing that had 3 riders in it, so it wasn't a simple ladders structure where you're getting people just progressing through both sides of the draw. All of a sudden we're re-racking timing results in every single round. We had to think through what the graphics displays were on the broadcast for it. There was all, what was the competitive side of things looking like, the different gates, how 3 gates link together. there was so much complexity to bring something new and unique into it. And, you know, the catch cry that we had, you know, I worked on this piece for nearly 7 months, not by choice, some of it. It was a change that came down from the Freeride Mountain Bike Association and the Crankworx Events International team. But 7 months of really careful thought created something that was hopefully quite unique and quite special. And so the team coming together, you know, whether it be the timing component, the marshalling on course, how do you make it race safely? You know, people might look at that finished product and say, geez, it looked great finished. It wasn't built 2 weeks before and almost got completely changed based on the first test ride 2 weeks out from the event. So being at the coalface for something so innovative was really something quite special, I think, for the team, as much as it probably created some stress points along the way. But, you know, having the right experts in the right places to really think through how this works and how this will come together to create what we saw in the live broadcast on the day was really something great to be a part of.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing. I think it was such a unique experience to see, watch and be a part of. And it's interesting, again, like I said before, to peek behind the curtains and to understand what goes in behind the scenes to that. So I recognise that we are close to time, Peter. Is there any other, I guess, what are the key takeaways that you've taken from this event that will help in the for future events? I think is probably a great question to look to roll towards the end of the conversation with. And any other tips, tricks and knowledge you'd like to share from this event would be great.
Yeah, I mean, for commissaires starting out or even the season ones, like communication has been the big thing all night. But your marshal briefings as a downhill commissaire or the chief commissaire of a downhill is the most important briefing you will ever give. And it's so important because of the race stoppage situation that, you know, is every chief commissaire's pet fear, I suppose. Especially at an international level when you've got fading light in the afternoon, you've got broadcast time coming up for the last hour of the day and so on, and you're running out of time to get everything finished. So you need to make that that race stoppage process very clear when you're going through your marshal briefings and how you do it. I do have this really cool UCI Marshal Handbook, which I'll send to CC and she can send out to everybody. I print one out every time I go to a downhill race and I use it to show people. It's got some great little cartoon graphics and so on. And it's a great prompter for you as the chief com as you're doing the briefing, and also that you're delivering the same message every time. For Worlds and Crankworx, I was doing at least two briefings a day, sometimes 3 because of the changeovers during the middle of the day and sometimes in the afternoon, to the point where both Shane and I had lost our voices towards the end of Crankworx. Yeah, look, I mean, I have a list of things here, but I think just some key things as somebody who's been doing this for a long time. Not that you get jaded by people, and but it is becoming more and more prevalent. And I hope that none of you here are listening, because some of you probably do have kids and don't take this too seriously. But you know, we see more and more you know, kids and parents wanting a seeding run for an under 15-year-old category. No reasoning, you can't even talk to them. They get very, very angry. And you've got a job to do, and your most important thing to do in the day is to run the event and not deal with people. And I just put up my hand and say, go away, leave us alone. And I even had a parent at Crankworx in New Zealand where I literally started a call to have security to have her husband and her child removed from the event. They were so bad, and it was all about a seating position. So, you know, yes, we do always need more commissaires as some of us get older and want to retire, or people just natural attrition drop out of the sport because their kids have left or whatever it might be. I think it's there's possibly some people on here who've recently, completed their regional commissaire's course, and that's great. And congratulations.
That the commissaire knows the level of event that they're stepping into and have the skills associated to that. So as highlighted with Steve earlier, a new commissaire as a club level event is the best place to start, and also finding a mentor like you've highlighted is great. If you're not as familiar with the community, then please feel free to reach out to AusCycling, and we do have good apples. So like Peter highlighted with Shane Curry, Jeff Hughes, Bob Morris, Ellie Smith, Susan Mitchell, and a whole bunch of other wonderful males and females who provide their time and happy to check, challenge and discuss how to enable communities to engage in that space. And as you've highlighted, state level of events, national level and UCI level events all have different requirements to enable them to run at that capacity. But also it is about making an inclusive environment for males and females to support and engage in this space. Shane, have you got something to add before we wrap up?
Get out. I know here in Victoria, if anyone wants to come along and do a race and that, I'm happy to take anyone under my wing and go through racing with them. Level 1s, level 2s, doesn't matter. Love to mentor anyone that wants to pursue it and go forward.
There is a process to work up to the bigger events, and small steps, and learn. I learned stuff every time I go to a race, and we're still learning, at the race we just went to and spent time together with. So yeah, just don't be afraid, to put your hand up and try to go to races. And
correct. Ask questions, learning, reflection, communication and collaboration. I think throughout this session, those are some of the key values that we look for in our commissaires, our event crew and all of the community that pull it together, because we do work in such a tight-knit environment when we need to deliver events that we need to know that we can trust, rely and support on each other. Thank you for sharing your time this evening, Peter. Appreciate the time, effort and knowledge that you shared, and it was nice to have a wee peek behind the curtain to what a UCI commissaire can and does do. Nathan, before I wrap up, is there anything as the event director for the UCI Masters and Crankworx that you'd like to share with the community this evening?
No, I think it's been covered really, really well by the team, other than to say, with my 20 years plus delivering events around the world, my biggest ethos is great team deliver great outcomes. And, the team that's kind of spoken to everything on this call today are so experienced. Having the right experience in the right places at the right time delivers fantastic experiences for our riders and everyone who comes to check out our events. So fantastic to UCC for organising such a fantastic session, and hopefully everyone managed to take something useful away from the conversation tonight.
Thanks, Nathan. So thank you to all for joining us tonight, and we trust that the session provided a unique opportunity to merge practical event management insights with reflections from the Masters and Crankworx event. Our goal is to empower our current and future commissaires, our clubs and communities with the knowledge, tools and collaborative spirit that are essential for hosting events. After discussing everything from infrastructure to roles and responsibilities and lessons learned, we encourage you to continue to strive to meet goals to make these events safe, fun, fair and inclusive. If there are any questions that you do have, you're welcome to reach out to AusCycling. We do have a bunch of helpful information on our website.